She had everything to live for: a loving husband, two young children, and a promising career as a real estate agent. But on March 15th, 2019, Maura Sullivan walked out her office in broad daylight and simply disappeared. No goodbye, no note, no trace. The security cameras capture her leaving the building at exactly 2:47 p.m., her car keys still sitting on her desk, her purse left behind. She walked toward the parking lot, turned the corner, and vanished into thin air. What would make a devoted mother abandon everything she held dear? This isn't just Maura's story. Every year, over 600,000 people go missing in the United States. Most are found within days. But some disappear so completely it's as if they never existed at all. What happens when someone you love walks out the door and is swallowed by the void? What drives a person to erase their own existence? And in a world of surveillance cameras and digital footprints, how is it still possible to vanish without a trace? Let's go back to that March afternoon. Maura had just shown a house to a young couple, the Hendersons, who were looking to buy their first home. Her colleague, Janet, remembered her being in good spirits, even excited about the potential sale. She was laughing about something the husband had said. Janet recalled she seemed completely normal, happy even. But at 2:30 p.m., Maura received a phone call. Janet watched as her colleague's face drained of color. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Maura hung up, grabbed her jacket, and said only, "I have to go. I'll be back." She never came back. The phone call came from an unknown number, a burner phone that was never traced. The cell tower data showed it originated from somewhere in downtown Portland. But that's where the trail went cold. Who called Maura that day? And what did they say that made her drop everything and walk away from her life? Her husband, David, was at home with their children, 8-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake. He wasn't worried when Maura didn't come home for dinner. She often worked late, showing houses to clients with busy schedules. But when midnight came and went with no word, David knew something was terribly wrong. David called the police at 12:47 a.m. The responding officer, Detective Sarah Martinez, had seen her share of missing person cases. Most were runaways, domestic disputes, or people who simply needed space. But something about Maura's disappearance felt different. There were no signs of marital problems, Detective Martinez explained. No financial troubles, no history of mental health issues. Maura Sullivan had no reason to run. The investigation revealed disturbing details. Maura's car was found 3 days later in a remote parking lot 40 miles from her office. The keys were in the ignition, the gas tank nearly empty. Her fingerprints were on the steering wheel, but there were others, unidentified prints that didn't match anyone in the system. Inside the car, investigators found something that chilled them to the bone. Tucked under the driver's seat was a single photograph, a picture of Maura as a child, maybe 7 years old, standing next to a man nobody in her family recognized. On the back, written in childish handwriting, were the words, "Uncle Tommy says this is our secret." David had never seen the photo before. Neither had Maura's parents or her sister. Who was Uncle Tommy? And why had Maura kept this photograph hidden for over 2 decades? The investigation into Maura's past revealed a web of secrets that her family never knew existed. Growing up, Maura had spent summers with a maternal grandmother in a small town called Cedar Falls. The grandmother had passed away 15 years earlier, taking her secrets with her. But in Cedar Falls, people remembered. They remembered a man who used to visit the grandmother's house. A man who paid special attention to young Maura. A man who called himself Tommy, though that wasn't his real name. His real name was Thomas Kellerman, and he had a history. A dark history of preying on children, of manipulation and abuse. He had served time in 3 different states under various aliases. The authorities thought he was dead, killed in a car accident in Nevada in 2003. But what if he wasn't? What if Thomas Kellerman had staged his own death and been living under yet another identity? What if he had been watching Maura all these years, waiting for the perfect moment to make contact? The phone call that lured Maura from her office could have been from him? Was this a predator finally coming to collect on some twisted debt from the past? As detectives dug deeper into Kellerman's history, they made a horrifying discovery. Over the past 30 years, at least 7 other people had vanished under similar circumstances. All had connections to small towns where Kellerman had once lived. All had disappeared after receiving mysterious phone calls. There was Rebecca Martinez, a teacher from Arizona who vanished in 2001. She had grown up in the same Nevada town where Kellerman had supposedly died. She left her classroom in the middle of the day after receiving a call, telling colleagues she would be right back. Then there was James Hoffman, a mechanic from Colorado who disappeared in 2007. Security footage showed him leaving his garage after answering his phone, his face pale with shock. His truck was found days later at a truck stop, empty except for a child's drawing tucked under the seat, a crayon picture of a man, and a little boy holding hands. Each case followed the same pattern: a phone call, a hasty departure, a vehicle found abandoned, and always, somewhere in the aftermath, a childhood photograph or memento that suggested a connection to their past, a past that involved Thomas Kellerman. Was this the work of one man, a predator who had spent decades perfecting the art of making people disappear? Or was something even more sinister at play? The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Margaret Chun, a forensic accountant working on an unrelated fraud case, stumbled across financial records that made her blood run cold. Someone had been systematically withdrawing small amounts of money from bank accounts belonging to the vanished victims, amounts so small they would never be noticed by grieving families or investigators. The withdrawals all led back to a series of fake identities, shell companies, and ultimately to a man living in a remote cabin in Montana, a man who had been legally dead for 20 years. Thomas Kellerman was very much alive. He had spent 2 decades living off the grid, funding his existence through the bank accounts of his victims. But he wasn't keeping them for money. He was keeping them for something far more disturbing. FBI agents surrounded the cabin on a cold October morning. What they found inside defied imagination. Kellerman had created a makeshift compound, complete with underground rooms and reinforced walls. And in those rooms, they found evidence of his victims. Not their bodies, but their lives. Personal belongings, journals, photographs. It was as if Kellerman had been collecting pieces of the people he had taken. But where were the victims themselves? Under interrogation, Thomas Kellerman finally spoke. What he revealed sent shockwaves to the law enforcement community and left families desperate for answers. He hadn't killed his victims. He had done something far more complex, far more disturbing. He had been systematically breaking down their identities, their sense of self, their connections to the outside world. He had convinced them that their families didn't want them, that the police weren't looking, that they had been forgotten. They believed they had no choice but to stay, Kellerman told investigators. I gave them new names, new identities. I told them their old lives were over. Some had tried to escape over the years. Those who did were never seen again. But others had been psychologically broken to the point where they couldn't imagine existing outside of Kellerman's control. The FBI raid had found evidence of at least 12 people living under Kellerman's influence over the past 2 decades. But when they raided the compound, they found it empty except for Kellerman himself. Where were the victims? The investigation revealed that Kellerman hadn't been working alone. He had spent years building a network of isolated properties across the western United States, moving his victims from location to location to avoid detection. Some properties were abandoned cabins. Others were underground bunkers. A few were hidden in plain sight, houses in suburban neighborhoods where the victims were kept as virtual prisoners, told they were in witness protection or hiding from dangerous enemies. The network included at least 6 other individuals, people Kellerman had recruited over the years, some of whom were former victims themselves who had been turned into accomplices through years of psychological manipulation. As law enforcement agencies coordinated raids across multiple states, they began to find them. In a farmhouse outside Phoenix, they discovered Rebecca Martinez, the teacher who had vanished 23 years earlier. She was alive but broken, convinced that returning to her family would put them in danger. In Colorado, they found James Hoffman, the mechanic, living in a basement room beneath a seemingly normal suburban home. He had been there for 17 years, working in an underground garage. repairing vehicles for Kellerman's operation while believing his family thought he was dead. The process of reuniting the survivors with their families was heartbreaking and complex. Many of the victims had been so thoroughly conditioned by Kellerman that they resisted rescue. They had lived for years believing their families had given up on them, that law enforcement had stopped looking, that they were safer in captivity than in the outside world. Rebecca Martinez didn't recognize her own sister when they were reunited. She had been told so many times that her family had forgotten her that she couldn't process the reality of their love and grief. James Hoffman's children were adults now. His youngest daughter, who had been 5 when he disappeared, was now 22 and married. The reunion was devastating. Years of grief and unanswered questions colliding with relief and bewilderment. But what about Maura Sullivan? After finding 11 of Kellerman's victims, investigators were still searching for her. She had been missing for only 8 months when the raid occurred. If the pattern held, she should have been the easiest to find, the least broken by years of captivity. But Maura was nowhere to be found. The answer came from Kellerman himself. In a final interview before his trial, he revealed that Maura Sullivan had been different from his other victims. She had remembered him clearly from her childhood. She recognized his voice on the phone immediately. She wasn't afraid, Kellerman said. She was angry. When Maura left her office that March afternoon, she hadn't gone to meet Kellerman as a victim. She had gone as someone seeking answers about her stolen childhood, about the abuse she had buried so deep she had convinced herself it was just bad dreams. But something had gone wrong. Maura had brought a gun to the meeting. In the struggle that followed, both Kellerman and Maura had been injured. Maura had managed to escape, but she was hurt, bleeding, and terrified that Kellerman's network would come after her family. So she had made a choice that none of his other victims had made. She had chosen to disappear on her own terms. Using skills she had learned from years of researching properties as a real estate agent, Maura had gone underground in the truest sense. She had found an abandoned mine shaft in the mountains of Oregon, stocked it with supplies, and created her own hidden sanctuary. For months, she had been living off the grid, monitoring news reports and waiting for law enforcement to uncover Kellerman's network. She had been afraid that revealing herself would put her family in danger from Kellerman's accomplices. When the FBI raids began making headlines, Maura finally saw her chance. She emerged from her self-imposed exile and contacted Detective Martinez through a secure phone line she had established months earlier. The reunion between Maura and her family was unlike the others. She had chosen her disappearance, maintained her sense of self, and protected not just herself but potentially countless future victims by providing law enforcement with crucial information about Kellerman's operation. But the cost had been enormous. 8 months of separation from her children. 8 months of letting David believe she was dead. 8 months of watching from a distance as her family grieved. Thomas Kellerman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His network of accomplices received sentences ranging from 15 years to life. The properties used in his operation were investigated and secured, but the impact on the survivors and their families will last forever. Some, like Rebecca Martinez, struggle daily with the psychological damage of decades of captivity. Others, like James Hoffman, are slowly rebuilding relationships with family members who had to grow up without them. Maura Sullivan returned to her family, but the scars of her experience run deep. She had to explain to her children why she had left, why she hadn't trusted the police to protect them, why she had chosen 8 months of self-imposed exile over the risk of leading danger to their door. Emma, now 9, asked her mother a question that haunted everyone involved in the case. Why didn't you just come home and let us help you fight the bad man? It's a question that goes to the heart of what Kellerman's victims endured. The isolation, the fear, the systematic destruction of trust in the very people who loved them most. The Kellerman case changed how law enforcement approaches missing person investigations. The idea that someone could be systematically collecting people, breaking down their identities, and keeping them alive but hidden had been almost unthinkable. Now, investigators look for patterns that might have been overlooked before. The mysterious phone calls, the abandoned vehicles, the childhood photographs, the signs that someone's past might be reaching out to claim them. Support groups have formed for the survivors and their families. The process of healing from this kind of systematic psychological abuse is unlike anything mental health professionals had encountered before. Maura Sullivan speaks to law enforcement groups now, sharing her story and helping train officers to recognize the signs of this type of predator. She talks about the importance of trusting victims, of understanding that someone who has experienced childhood abuse might not always make decisions that seem rational to outsiders. I chose to disappear, she tells them, because I thought it was the only way to keep my family safe. I was wrong about a lot of things, but I was right about one thing. Kellerman was still out there, still taking people, still destroying lives. Her voice breaks when she talks about the 8 months she spent hiding in that mine shaft, monitoring news reports and praying that law enforcement would find the other victims before it was too late. Every day I stayed hidden was a day that someone else might disappear. That's something I'll have to live with forever. But she also talks about the strength she found in that isolation, the clarity that came from taking control of her own fate rather than being controlled by fear. I vanished without a trace, she says, but I chose when to come back. That choice, that's what Kellerman tried to take from all of us, the choice to determine our own fate. The investigation is officially closed, but the questions linger. In a world where we're all connected, where privacy is increasingly rare, how is it still possible for someone to simply vanish? How many other Thomas Kellermans are out there, perfecting the art of making people disappear? And perhaps most disturbing of all, how many people are out there right now, hidden in plain sight, convinced that they have no choice but to stay invisible, that the people who love them have given up hope? The answer, according to experts, is that we may never know. Because the perfect disappearance isn't just about hiding from the world. It's about convincing someone that they're already forgotten. Maura Sullivan chose to come back from the void. But for every story like hers, there might be dozens of others who remain lost, not because they can't be found, but because they've been convinced they don't deserve to be found. In the end, the most terrifying truth about people who vanish without a trace isn't that they disappear. It's that sometimes they're convinced to stay gone. The question that haunts everyone who worked on this case is simple. If Maura hadn't been strong enough to fight back, if she hadn't chosen to emerge from hiding, would we have ever known about Thomas Kellerman's network? Would the other victims still be out there, living under assumed identities, convinced their families have forgotten them? And if there was one Thomas Kellerman, carefully building a network of hidden victims over decades, how many others might be out there operating in the shadows, collecting people like trophies, keeping them just alive enough to suffer, but hidden enough to be forgotten? That's the question that keeps Detective Martinez awake at night. That's the question that drives Maura Sullivan to keep telling her story, even when the memories are too painful to bear. Because somewhere out there, in a cabin or a basement or an abandoned mine shaft, someone might be waiting for rescue, convinced that no one is looking for them anymore. And until we find them all, the story of people who vanish without a trace will never really end. Would you have handled this moment differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more heartfelt stories that'll keep you coming back. See you next time.